Welcome back to Haunted Stories. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and smash that like to support my free and daily content for you. So gather around, dim the lights, and prepare to be captivated by the eerie mysteries and ghostly encounters that await in the shadows. Without further ado, let's dive into today's bone-chilling video. First story, The Desolate Highway. The engine hummed monotonously as John gripped the steering wheel, his eyes locked onto the seemingly endless stretch of highway ahead. The clock on the dashboard blinked 2:47 a.m., casting an eerie blue glow across the interior of the car. He was miles away from the nearest town, the only company being the barren fields on either side of the road. The radio emitted nothing but static, shrouding the car in an unsettling silence broken only by the rhythm of the tires against the asphalt. John's eyes darted occasionally to the rearview mirror, as if expecting to see another vehicle on this desolate road. But there was nothing behind him except the inky darkness. As the miles ticked by, John's sense of unease grew. A flicker of movement caught his attention in the distance. He squinted, trying to make out what it was. A figure? No, just a trick of the shadows. He told himself it was exhaustion playing tricks on his mind, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. A subtle vibration reverberated through the steering wheel, startling John. Glancing at his phone, he saw no notifications, yet the sensation persisted. It was as if an invisible presence clung to the car, whispering secrets he couldn't decipher. A few more miles passed before John's headlights illuminated a silhouette up ahead. As he drew nearer, he realized it was a hitchhiker standing on the side of the road. The person's thumb extended, seeking a ride in the dead of night. Despite the nagging apprehension in his gut, John's compassion won out. He slowed down and rolled down the window.
"Need a lift?"
John called out, his voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. The hitchhiker's face was obscured by the darkness, but a faint voice replied,
"Yes, thank you."
As the stranger climbed into the car, John was struck by an odd sense of familiarity. The hitchhiker's clothes were slightly outdated, and their features seemed just out of focus, like an old photograph. They exchanged a few polite words, but a heavy silence lingered between them. John's pulse quickened when he glanced in the rearview mirror and noticed the hitchhiker's reflection missing. His grip on the steering wheel tightened, and he cleared his throat.
"So, where are you headed?"
The hitchhiker's voice was distant, as if carried by the wind.
"Home, just like you."
Sweat formed on John's brow as he processed the words. His heart raced, and he fought to keep his focus on the road. He stole another glance at the hitchhiker, only to find the seat next to him empty. With a jolt, John realized he was alone in the car. The weight of the silence crushed him as the highway stretched out in front of him, unending and empty. Panic surged through his veins, and he pressed his foot on the gas pedal, desperate to escape this haunting encounter. But the speedometer needle didn't budge, and the car continued to creep along at a torturous pace. The surroundings blurred into an indiscernible haze as the road twisted and turned, leading him deeper into a nightmarish void. The dashboard lights flickered, casting distorted shadows on his face. Hours melded into an eternity, and John's grip on reality wavered. His voice cracked as he screamed, a primal cry that echoed into the abyss. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the highway ended. The car came to a shuddering halt at the edge of an endless chasm, the abyss gaping before him. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, John's eyes were hollow, reflecting the terror of a nightmarish journey that defied explanation. He stepped out of the car, staring into the void with a mix of awe and despair, forever haunted by the memory of a desolate highway that led to the unknown. Second story, silent retreat. The rain beat relentlessly against the window panes, a ceaseless symphony of water drops in the heart of the dense forest. Sarah had been driving for hours, her fatigue amplified by the storm that raged outside. In the distance, the faint glow of a cabin's lights beckoned like a beacon of refuge. Guiding her car down a rugged path, Sarah's breath caught as the cabin came into view. It appeared rustic and inviting, nestled within the embrace of the towering trees. She parked her car and rushed to the shelter, rainwater dripping from her clothes onto the creaking wooden floor. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of wood and the soothing crackle of a dying fire. Candles cast a dim, flickering light that danced with the shadows, creating an atmosphere of eerie tranquility. Sarah exhaled, her tension easing as she closed the door behind her. But as she settled by the fire, the silence felt almost oppressive. The only sound was the occasional rustle of leaves outside and the patter of rain on the roof. She considered how truly alone she was out here. No neighbors, no cell service, just her and the enigmatic woods. A sudden noise made Sarah's heart race, and she snapped her head in the direction of the kitchen. The sound was faint, a subtle shuffle or a soft breath, like someone else occupying the cabin. She shook off the unease, convincing herself it was just her imagination running wild in the solitude. Despite her efforts to dismiss her unease, Sarah's nerves were on edge. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside seemed amplified in the stillness. She tried to read a book she found on the cabin's shelf, but her eyes kept darting to the corners of the room, where the shadows seemed to pool and gather. The storm raged on, its howling wind a stark contrast to the silence within. Sarah decided to light more candles, hoping to dispel the creeping sense of dread that had begun to take hold. But as the flames illuminated the cabin, she caught glimpses of movement just beyond her line of sight, fleeting shadows that seemed to dart away whenever she turned her head. Tightening her grip on the book, Sarah's breath hitched as a whisper of a voice brushed against her ear. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The whispering grew more insistent, forming words that were just beyond comprehension. It was as if the cabin itself was trying to convey a message, a haunting secret. With a shaky hand, Sarah rose from her seat, her eyes scanning every dark corner of the room. The shadows seemed to coalesce, swirling like smoke, and she stumbled back, her mind grappling with the inexplicable phenomenon. The cabin's walls seemed to press closer, suffocating her in their weight. As if in a trance, Sarah moved toward the bedroom, drawn by an invisible force that seemed to emanate from within. The room was cold, the air thick with a palpable tension. She hesitated at the threshold, a chill running down her spine, as the sensation of being watched intensified. The bed was unmade, sheets in disarray, and a mirror on the wall caught her eye. Her reflection stared back at her, but there was something wrong. Her image seemed distorted, her features contorted into a grotesque caricature. She stumbled back, her heart racing, unable to tear her gaze away. A soft rustling noise behind her sent a surge of adrenaline through her veins. Slowly she turned, her breath catching in her throat as she faced the source of the sound. The closet door was slightly ajar, and from the darkness within, a pair of eyes glinted, fixed on her with an unsettling intensity. Terror held her in its grip as the eyes seemed to grow larger, closer, until a figure emerged from the shadows. A woman, dressed in a tattered white gown, stepped forward, her features contorted into an expression of sorrow and longing. She reached out a hand, her fingers brushing against the air as if yearning for something just out of reach. Sarah's voice caught in her throat, unable to form words as the ghostly figure drew closer. The cabin seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, the air growing colder and heavier. The woman's whisper seemed to fill the room, a haunting melody that resonated in Sarah's very bones. And then, as suddenly as it began, the figure faded, leaving behind a sense of emptiness that echoed in the room. Sarah stood alone, her heart racing, her mind reeling from the encounter. The storm outside had subsided, and the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows. The cabin, once a haven from the storm, now felt like a prison, a place haunted by the memories of a past long forgotten. With trembling hands, Sarah gathered her belongings, her steps faltering as she crossed the threshold and left the cabin behind. As the first rays of sunlight touched her face, a mixture of relief and lingering unease settled within her. The forest seemed different now, less mysterious, and more like a place where the boundary between the living and the spectral had blurred. Sarah glanced back at the cabin, its windows reflecting the morning light like distant eyes watching her depart. Third story, the Midnight Express. The train platform was eerily empty as Amy stepped onto the platform, her breath misting in the cold night air. The Midnight Express, as it was known, was the last train of the day, barreling through the heart of the country under the cloak of darkness. She glanced around, half expecting to see other passengers waiting, but there was no one in sight. The train pulled in with an eerie silence, its metal exterior gleaming dully under the pale moonlight. The conductor's smile was warm, but his eyes held a distant gleam as he took her ticket. With a gentle nod, he motioned for her to board. She entered the train, the doors hissing shut behind her, sealing her within its confines. The interior was dimly lit, the overhead lights casting a sepia glow over the empty seats. Amy chose a compartment near the back, sinking into the plush seat with a sigh. The train jolted to life, the rhythmic clatter of wheels against tracks becoming a soothing backdrop to her thoughts. She watched the passing landscape, feeling the weight of the day's journey begin to lift. As time passed, Amy's eyelids grew heavy. She nestled deeper into her seat, the gentle rocking of the train lulling her into a fitful slumber. But her dreams were restless, haunted by fleeting shadows and distant whispers that seemed to echo through the narrow corridor outside her compartment. Awakening with a start, Amy rubbed her eyes, disoriented. The train was eerily quiet, the rhythmic clatter having faded into an unsettling silence. She ventured out into the corridor, her footsteps echoing in the emptiness. Glancing out the window, she realized the landscape outside was unfamiliar, a vast expanse of darkness, devoid of any landmarks. Panic gnawed at the edges of her mind as she made her way through the train, searching for signs of life. The compartments were all vacant, their seats neatly arranged, but there was no trace of the other passengers she had expected to find. The oppressive silence closed in on her, suffocating and deafening. A soft whisper echoed down the corridor, sending a shiver down Amy's spine. She followed the sound, her breath catching as she reached the dining car. The tables were set, as if waiting for guests who would never come. The whisper grew more distinct, forming words that sent a chill through her veins.
How long?
The voice murmured, an eerie echo that seemed to reverberate from the very walls of the train. Amy stumbled back, her heart pounding. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of nightmare. But the weight of the silence, the emptiness of the train, was all too real. She retraced her steps, returning to her compartment, her thoughts a maelstrom of fear and confusion. The hours stretched on, each moment heavier than the last. Amy's mind began to unravel as she grappled with the inexplicable reality she found herself in. The walls of the train seemed to close in, the compartment shrinking around her, and the rhythmic clatter of the tracks had become a relentless cacophony that pounded in her ears. With trembling hands, she reached for the emergency button by the door, praying for a response, for a voice on the other end. But when she pressed it, the only sound that answered was the hollow echo of her own voice bouncing off the walls. Desperation settled over her like a shroud, and she sank to the floor, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. And then, just as suddenly as the silence had descended, the train shuddered to a stop. Amy's heart raced as the door to her compartment creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. The conductor, his eyes distant no more, regarded her with a solemn gaze.
"We've arrived,"
he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate with the very soul of the train. Amy followed him out onto the platform, blinking against the blinding light of dawn. The landscape stretched out before her, an unfamiliar but undoubtedly real place. She turned to the conductor, her voice shaking.
"What happened? Where did everyone go?"
The conductor's gaze held a hint of sadness, as if he carried the weight of 1,000 journeys.
"Sometimes the Midnight Express becomes a journey of solitude. A path that takes you to the heart of your own fears, your own doubts."
As the train disappeared into the distance, Amy stood alone, her heart heavy with the weight of the surreal night she had experienced. The journey had been more than just a train ride. It had been a confrontation with the deepest corners of her mind, a nightmarish odyssey that left her forever changed. Thank you for watching whole video. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and smash that like to support my free and daily content for you. If you enjoyed this video, drop a comment and tell me if it got you chills. See you for another scary tale video.